about what I've learned. I was thinking about where I wanna go. I was thinking about who I wanna be. So I pulled out my phone and I called my mom and everyone I wanted to be. And I told them I wanna be someone else. But I've never wanted
What's
to be
that cliched
anybody
Ferris
but
Bueller quote
me.
again? Something about moving too fast? Well, that's how I felt these past 2 months. With trips and weddings and parties, life has been moving too fast that I haven't even had a chance to breathe. So I thought I'd sit down and take a moment to share some recent favorites today. So I wanted to do a current favorites video that encompasses the past few months, so spring basically so far. It's a collection of a lot of different topics, from beauty to entertainment, and within entertainment there's a lot of subcategories, so I hope you enjoy this video. Beauty is a topic that I rarely talk about on this channel. It's just something that obviously is a part of my life, as it is with many people's lives, but I have a routine and I've stuck with it for the most part. Of course, that doesn't mean that I don't change up my moisturizer, for example, but I am very picky about things and I like to keep things very simple and structured in how I do my skincare. And even also if I put on makeup like I have today, I just like to keep it simple. And of course that also comes down to the products too that I'm using. I don't like things that are fancy, I guess you could say. I really like simple, either pharmacy products or also more, this is not a great word to use, but green, quote unquote, so something that's maybe more sustainable, like, I don't know, like tablets for toothpaste. But one of those things that I found recently that is more sustainable, is a face wash. And this face wash is a bar of soap. It's from the brand Respire, which is French. So I don't know if it's necessarily easy to find outside of France or even Europe, but I really like it. And I've always wanted to try bar soap for your face specifically, but I never really knew what that meant. I thought it would basically be like the types of bars of soap that you use for your body to wash. But this one is so nice. It's like very oily, but not in a way that feels like you're just putting straight up oil on your face. It still feels like you're washing your face. It doesn't have the same like sudsy oil stripping feel that you would think a soap like this would have. It has a very nice smell too. I think it's supposed to be cottonwood or something similar, in the sense that it's very fresh smelling. But yeah. Oh, and then also the metal thing is a little magnet you put into the soap that you can then attach to a little thing that you can put on your like shower wall, so it sticks up and so it better drains the water that gets obviously onto your soap when you use it. So I really like that. And it's a great little investment. So technically a second thing in beauty, but mostly I'm sticking with the soap. But I highly recommend, not necessarily this brand if you can't find it, but bar soaps for specifically your face in general. This is eye-opening and also just so much easier too, as a side note, when you're traveling, that you can just put it in like a soap box when you travel and you don't have to worry about if it's more than 100 milliliters or 3 ounces of liquids. It's great. So my next topic is games, and not to sound annoying, but I'm not the hugest games person in the world. It's just never been something that I've gravitated towards. Specifically video games. Obviously, like many people, I had my fair share obsession with The Sims, specifically The Sims 1 through 3. I haven't played The Sims 4 ever. And quite a few other video games of that type of nature. But ones that I've become obsessed with in the past few months are the New York Times games. So like Mini and Wordle. The Mini I started as, I guess, a fun way to kind of try to expand not necessarily my vocabulary, but just the way that I think of words, because I've just always had a hard time with coming up with words when I need to have them, or just thinking of something like that. So I thought that that would just be a nice way to learn how to play with words and also just think about them in the correct sense as you need to for the game to complete the crossword puzzle. I have done a few of the main New York Times crossword puzzles, so like the large ones that you would see, I don't know, your grandparents or even maybe your parents playing when you were younger, which I feel bad saying, but I always kind of associated that with like my grandmother, for example, so I never really thought that it would be something that I would do, not because I didn't think that it would be fun, but because I thought that I wouldn't get the references. But I feel like the great thing with the New York Times puzzles, not that I do that many, and to be honest, I can only really do Monday and Tuesday. I have never tried Wednesday, and I don't really want to try any of the harder ones, but that the words span multi-generations, so it's not just going to be references that, you know, if you were alive in the 70s or of a certain age, you would know what they meant. So I've really just been appreciating playing both the mini and the New York Times crossword puzzle. Another game which a lot of my friends also I know love to play is Wordle, and that I don't necessarily have a huge streak for, or I mean recently I've just gone back into it, so I really have like only a few days under my belt, but I go in and out of playing it, and I think also it helps to have the streak of just trying to get and guess as many words as possible in as many days, and trying to do it as in few tries as possible. So yeah, it's a fun game for me. It's also something that I like to play both of them with my boyfriend. He's not an English native speaker, so it's fun for him. And I think for me, just to see what his references are for certain words, and he'll sometimes get them faster than I do. And so yeah, it's just a fun way to both unite cultural references for me personally, and I think also for my boyfriend, and to work on vocabulary and what references are for different things. My next topic is TV shows, and I've actually watched quite a few these past few months. Most of them are more recent, so I'm going to save those for after the first one that I want to talk about, just because I feel like a lot of people have seen them. Future me here. I realized while editing that this upcoming part had really terrible audio, so I decided to redo it. And yeah, here I am a few weeks later with no makeup on. But the first one that I want to talk about actually came out in 2017 on Netflix, and it's called Glow. It's a fictionalized retelling, I guess you could say, of the TV show called Glow from the 1980s, which stands for Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. It follows Alison Brie's character, who's this struggling actress in Los Angeles, and she gets an audition for a TV show that she doesn't really know anything about. So she goes to the audition and realizes it's for wrestling, and it involves a hodgepodge of characters and how these women and a few men, so like the director, all come together to create this really weird and crazy show. I recommend it if you're looking for something fun to watch. It's not a terribly deep show, and I feel like the first two seasons are definitely stronger than the third one, which tries to get a little bit more in depth within the characters' problems, but because, I think this is why, the last season, so what would have been the fourth season, had to be cancelled because of COVID and being unable to film in that time period. The TV show in general lacks a sense of finality, but then especially the plots in season 3 lack a sense of an ending. If you disregard that part, I think the show is just a lot of fun to watch. All the characters are very unique and fun to see on screen. The other 3 shows that I wanted to talk about all came out within the past year. The first one being The Bear, which is about a chef who takes over his dead brother's restaurant in Chicago. It's about him struggling to get over this death. It's about him being a very higher quality gourmet chef coming to a restaurant that's very working class and community driven, and how he must reconcile with both of those things, so his past and his present. I strongly liked the show. I know that there's a second season coming out soon, so I suggest definitely watching it. I also watched Fleischman's in Trouble, which is with Jesse Eisenberg and Claire Danes, and it's about a couple in the Upper East Side who are going through a divorce. And so at the first part, it's from Jesse Eisenberg's perspective, and then it later goes into Claire Danes, and it's a very thought-provoking show because you realize that nobody is at fault in this relationship, and how, especially in movies and TV shows, everything always has to be in black and white, and that one person always has to be in the wrong and the other person is, you know, the angel of the situation. But that's just not how real life is. And so I really appreciated that they took that lens and decided to carry it. As I said, it takes place in the Upper East Side, and I was born there, so I have a very nostalgic feeling towards that neighborhood because I remember going to some of the places that they went to, and yeah, everything like that. And then lastly, a show that came out, I think at the beginning of April, which is Beef. It's also a Netflix show, and I wouldn't say that I was in love with it, but I thought it was still like a very unique show. It's an A24 production, and it stars Ali Wong and Steven Yeun, and they're from two different classes in Los Angeles. Ali Wong's from a more upper class, but she's said that she had to work her way up to get to that point. And then Steven Yeun, who's from a working class family that is more of an immigrant family too, so his parents are from Korea and he grew up as a second generation immigrant. It's about their own tensions within their own lives and how that starts to bubble up when they almost have an accident in a car park outside of a store. And so it goes from there, and their own anger management problems, their own very severe anger management problems, and how they try to sabotage each other, but then how that also ends up kind of sabotaging their own lives, and how they must reconcile with their past and also the way that they react to things that are obviously not healthy. I feel like the show gets crazier as it goes on, so I definitely suggest that if you find it to be a little bit slow in the beginning, to continue on, and hopefully you'll really enjoy it in the end. Future me again, I realized that while I was creating this video and writing it and everything, that I completely forgot to talk about the show, which actually is very relevant to the past week in the northeast of the US, and that is the TV show Extrapolations. It's by Scott Burns and is on Apple TV. It's a TV show with a lot of huge names in it, like Meryl Streep, Sienna Miller, that are just off the top of my head, but many more included. And it basically is a limited series of 6 or 8 episodes, I forget how many, and they look at the climate crisis and how it will evolve and change in the next 10 to, I believe, 40 years. So that is, for a lot of my audience, I think a lot of our lifetime. And obviously it's a fictionalized story, it's science fiction, we don't know what's really going to happen in the future, but I believe that a lot of this is based on projections by scientists of what they think could happen. And not to spoil it, but one of the reasons why I thought of this TV show when I was hearing about the forest fires that were in Canada and the smoke that was coming down in the US was that forest fires and smoke in general, and having to breathe that and how that changes our lives, is a huge component of one of the episodes, but then also like a more minor component in all of the other episodes, because obviously pollution plays a huge impact in climate change and the climate crisis and how we'll be able to live in the future. It's an overall really interesting plot and analysis of what the future could hold for us. Okay, back to old me. So my next topic is movies, and the first one that I want to talk about is Point Break, which is a Kathryn Bigelow movie from 1991. It is a surfing movie, but also a very extreme take on masculinity within Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze's characters. Something that I learned that was really interesting is that Patrick Swayze did basically all of the extreme stunts within the movie, so the skydiving and the surfing were him, which is kind of insane when you see these scenes and how amazing he is at them. It's basically about Keanu Reeves' character who works for the FBI, and he must infiltrate the surfing group who he believes to be robbing banks in the Los Angeles area. It becomes very much a cat and mouse race game within this movie of him trying to catch the men, but then also trying to infiltrate them and become their friends, and Patrick Swayze's character realizing that he's doing this and just trying to continue to force him on this route of extreme masculinity, I guess you could say, and the extremes that one can go to when living life, basically, and the way that he lives life. The next movie that I wanted to talk about is Showing Up. It's a very different movie from Point Break. It's about a woman in Portland who's she's struggling. She's having her own art shows, but she's an artist, and she has a neighbor who's far more successful than her, and she actually is renting the apartment from her neighbor. So there's this weird dynamic, and so it basically is the week leading up to the main character, Michelle Williams, who's the actress for this character's art show at a gallery in Portland. She's a very complicated character and not somebody that you would necessarily enjoy or love, but she has a very strong heart to her, and so she's a fun person to watch throughout the movie, kind of navigate her family, the obligations that she has with work, and then also trying to just finish her art and have it be good. I think I especially liked this movie because I always like those types of communities, even though I'm not a artist in that sense, even though I would love to do ceramics or painting, but I've just never really had, I've never done ceramics, but I've never really had the desire to sit and paint, so it's just not something that I would do, but I like the idea of it in the community. So of course I liked watching this movie because it is based within that community that's very artsy and academic and hipstery, and yeah, it's I liked watching it for the sneak peek into the cox-wearing artists of Portland. And the movie is by Kelly Reichardt, whose previous movie was First Cow, which I didn't like, but she also did Certain Women, which I very much liked. So I think this movie I would equate more to Certain Women than I would to First Cow, at least in my internal rating of how I liked the movie. And lastly, I wanted to talk about books. I have two main books that I want to talk about. The first book is Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. If you've never read any of her nonfiction, she was a reporter in Los Angeles and then later New York, and then I think back to Los Angeles and then back to New York. I forget exactly the timeline, but she was a reporter who mostly covered on human interest stories, so about famous people, but then also less famous people, or not necessarily celebrities, but also people within the Black Panther movement, or just people who were making and changing the California landscape, but also the global and national landscapes. And so this book is actually the first novel that I've ever read from hers. It's about an actress who's basically having a manic episode in Los Angeles in the 1960s, I believe. So it has a very a glamorous feel to it while also being very realistic and depressing. The thing that I've always loved about Joan Didion is the way that she writes and the way that she captures her characters or her subjects, and I think that she does this supremely well on this book. You really feel for the character even though she's by no means a perfect person, or in some ways also a very tragic person. She really also captures the positives and negatives of Hollywood and how that treats people, both within this book but also just in general too in her other writings. So if you're a Joan Didion fan like I am, or potentially just curious about her readings, I highly suggest this book, and I highly suggest her other works too, just in general. The second book that I wanted to suggest was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I have it in this collection of both long fiction and short fiction that he wrote, and it was my first time reading any of his longer fiction. I had read Sony's Blues before, and actually I reread it since I have it in this book now. Yeah, he's an amazing, beautiful writer. It's about an American man who falls in love with an Italian man in Paris, I believe in the 1950s, and his regrets but also love for this man, but then also his inability to fully confront his own desires. It's very beautiful and sorrowful, and it's a very interesting glimpse into how life would have been for a gay man within this time period. It's a very empathetic book, I would say that. And just to include it, because I reread it, Sony's Blues is also a really beautiful story. It's about two brothers who are on very different tracks in life. One who's a teacher and more established in his life, and his younger brother who's an addict, and he's also a jazz musician in New York. They grew up in poverty in Harlem and both have escaped it, but both in very different ways, and they just can't really accept or understand each other because of these different paths that they took. So I really love his writing. It's very soulful and touching. Yeah, if you haven't read James Baldwin, he is an ultimate classic, and there is a reason why. It's a very also interesting analysis within the American culture. You're sleeping on James Baldwin if you have not read him. So that's it for today. I know it was slightly different than the usual videos, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and if you did, then please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you soon. Bye.